Today I'll be talking about how I fish in the early springtime and what I have set up for rods and what I got in my tackle box for the whole early spring season. So that's covering anything from ice out to pre-spawn. So let's get right into it. I'll start out with my most boring one, and that is the spinning rod. I have a St. Croix 7-foot medium light, and on that I usually will have a little paddle tail swim bait. This is the power bait. I don't remember the exact name of it, but it's a little 2.8-inch power bait swim bait on a little Gamakatsu jig head. It actually might be a Trokar jig head. I think it's a Trokar hook jig head. And this bait will catch fish for you all year round, especially in the early spring, late fall scenarios. For me, that's when I like to get it out. I'll also be throwing a Ned rig on this rod, shaky head, and a weighted wacky worm. So that's what I like to throw on this. But the way that I like to fish this bait is I let it sink all the way down to the bottom, and I will just I'll almost work it like a jig. So when you pull it up and then let it fall down, that tail will flutter. That can get you a ton of bites. But also, if you know that there's fish there, if you grab fish, if you have a boat or you've missed fish before, this is a great follow bait because they'll just inhale this. It catches fish all year round. Wicked, subtle action in the water that really is finessey enough to get the fish to bite, but still can target those bigger fish if they're being really finicky. And with the Ned rig, and if you're not throwing a Ned rig by now, you've been living under a rock. So just drag that, hop it on the bottom, feel the rocks and stuff. I prefer the weedless Ned heads though, which I don't have any of right now. I haven't been able to find any of those in my local stores, but the weedless Ned head is basically just a let's see if I have any hooks. No, I don't have any hooks, but it really helps you get snagged, because if you're throwing Ned rigs, you're going to get snagged, especially if you're primarily a bank fisherman or a kayak fisherman like myself. Yeah, that's just a great option that really helps you stay out of those rocks. So that's what I'll be throwing on my spinning setup in the early spring, that little swim bait right there. So the next rod that I wanted to talk about was my jerkbait setup, and this is the 6 Sense Provoke jerkbait in a perch color. You guys can see I love the 6 Sense stuff. They make really good quality. Comes with great hooks on it, and you really need a suspending jerkbait this time of year. So with something like this, I'll get it down to, this is a shallower diving one, but I can get it down to 6 feet. And 6 feet is a pretty good depth for the local ponds near me, but it's really just about adapting to, you want it to be able to suspend in whatever water column the fish are in. So when they look up, they see that jerkbait just sitting there. And I like to twitch, and then pause it for 5 to 10 seconds. And then I'll pull it. It's not a doon doon doon, but more of a twitch, and then just pull. And I'll get bit so many times just on that pull or the 5-second pause in between twitches. But I'm throwing everything from jerkbaits to liplesses on this, and this is a Shimano SLX 7-2 on a Dobbins Fury 733, and it's a great reaction rod. It's made for spooks and flukes and Senkos and stuff, but I've been using it a lot for crankbaits and liplesses and jerks, and this thing just really gets it done for all of those reaction bites. The liplesses that I like and the crankbaits that I like in the springtime especially, I mean, you guys all know about the whole red kick that's been going on for the last few years. Red in the springtime really gets it done, but since most of the time it's harder to get your hands on those, I'll just throw a regular crawfish style lipless or a crawfish style crankbait. And this crankbait, what's key, is completely silent. So this is the Rapala, I don't remember, but it dives 8 feet, 8 to 10 I think, and it's not a balsa bait, which I would have preferred, but this is what the store had. And a crawfish colored crankbait can really get it done for you all year long. But like I said about the little paddle tail, I really prefer it in the springtime and in the fall. And this is another 6 cents bait. This has a little bit more of a rattle to it, but these hooks on this bait are just insane. I think this is the 6 cents Quake. Don't quote me on that, but it's a 6 cents Quake. And the way that I like to use the lipless in the early springtime, right before you switch over to those red colors in pre-spawn, is I'll run it just on bottom, like just bumping into rocks and stuff, really slowing it down, hopping it every once in a while. But it's a little bit different than when you're throwing the red liplesses for big bass in the springtime, like right when they're feeding up in pre-spawn. Just a little bit different retrieve, but definitely have a few crankbaits that are in a crawfish pattern in your arsenal. The next rod that I'm talking about is a jig rod and just a jig bait. If you guys haven't been throwing football heads in the springtime, you are definitely missing out. That is how I get the majority of my big bites. I'll throw a 1/2 ounce in a 3/4 ounce football jig, either in a black or a black and blue to a brown, something natural. Black and blue is more for when the water's dirty, but the key for springtime jig fishing is having a trailer with 2 fluttery appendages, not like a, well, you can throw like a creature bait on like a finesse jig and stuff, or not like a rage, not like a rage tail craw or anything like that. Not something with a super like loud and vibrant kick, more with like a subtle, just fluttery when it comes down in the water, just kind of going like that. Something like that will always get it done when the water is colder. And that is, like I said, how I get the majority of my big bites in the springtime. I've caught numerous 5-pounders on this exact jig, the Dirty Jigs football head, and I'm throwing this on a 7'6" medium heavy fast action 13 fishing Omen Black 2 rod and a Daiwa Tatula TWS CT. And this is a higher gear ratio, an 8-to-1, and I like that a lot for the early springtime and just really chucking it out there. I'm throwing a 15-pound fluorocarbon, and with the faster gear ratio, it allows me to throw other baits as well, like smaller glide baits, and cover some water with a spinnerbait and stuff like that, because that's mainly what I use this rod for, is jigs, spinnerbaits, and chatterbaits. So we'll get into the baits more specifically a little bit later on in the video, but for now, let's just move on to the next rod. So the next setup that I'd like to talk about is my smaller glide bait setup with glides that are under like 2 3/4 ounces is usually the sweet spot for me. I'll switch over from my like just heavy rod to a Swimbait rod, but this is a River to Sea S-Waver 168 in the light trout color, and I'm throwing that on a loose 7'4" heavy action, like basically a frog flipping stick. And that'll, like, you don't need a big Swimbait rod to chuck these weight glide baits around. I think this is only like 2 1/4 ounce. That, I'm not 100% on that, but you don't need that huge Swimbait setup to throw these baits. And I'm just throwing that on a Shimano Corrado K 8-to-5 gear ratio, a little bit faster than I'd like for throwing glides, but you make do with what you got. And I'm throwing 50-pound braid to a 20-pound fluorocarbon leader. And I don't always prefer braid to leader when I'm throwing swim baits, but it seems like for the smaller glides, you get a better action, and you don't have to worry about messing up and getting a bad backlash and stuff like that, because like with braid, it's a lot easier to get out of that stuff. And I'll show you guys, like I said, more baits that I'll be throwing this spring. I'll take you through my tackle box, what I have in there at all times. But for now, just like I said, that River to Sea S-Waver 168 in the light trout color, killer bait for me in the springtime, ton of big bites. So let's move on to the actual swim bait setup now. Just jump right into it. Throw in the, make sure I can't hit my ceiling here, Dobbins Fury Series 806 on a Quantum Monster with 20-pound fluorocarbon. And the bait that I have on this right now is the Savage Gear. I don't remember what the actual name of the bait is, but it's a Savage Gear swim bait. And the thing you'll notice about the tail is that it has a wedge tail, not a boot tail like some of the other swim baits that I throw. And that's killer in the springtime because it's more subtle than just a wide kick like that. And you want to be throwing realistic baits. Around here we have a ton of trout, like a ton of trout, so I'm throwing whatever imitates those brookies and rainbows in the lakes and rivers around my house. But this bait, I'll just slow reel it on the bottom, so just like literally as methodical as that. Like that's about as fast as I'll go. Maybe I'll pop it every once in a while. I try not to, but Dobbin's Fury, ooh, that's good for it. Dobbin's Fury 806, this is a heavy fast action and it's rated 2 to 8 ounces. And that's not to say that you should throw 8-ounce baits on this. I wouldn't. Like it, this is a 3-ounce swim bait in it. It does just fine with that. I wouldn't go up to 8 ounces. I'd move up to the heavier size, but you guys can tell it's got the really long handle on it. Made for chucking big baits. And a swim bait like this, if you're going for those big bites in the springtime, great. Like have this on a setup, have a nice trout, like a Huddleston style swim bait set up. If you're going for the smaller fish, it can still get bit, but I'd probably be throwing more of a jerkbait or a little paddle tail. This is mainly for those big bites. So if you want the big bites, throw the big baits, especially in those early spring time periods around the country where those fish are feeding up. They might be slow moving, but they're still feeding up. So what I thought I'd do now is just kind of take you through my spring tackle box, well, early spring tackle box, and this is pretty much what I'll be throwing through pre-spawn up until, well, through like ice out up until pre-spawn. But I'll start with a couple of swim baits that I like. This is the Megabass Mag Draft, and I think this is it's a pearl style color. I don't remember the name. It has a little bit of gold flake in there, and I'm throwing that on an Owner Beast 8-aught swim bait hook. And this has the boot tail, as you guys can tell, the one that has the wider wiggle like I just talked about when I was talking about the Savage Gear one. But this bait, you're still gonna fish it just like the Savage Gear, just right on bottom. You can reel it a little bit faster. This is more of a pre-spawn bait for me, not like right after ice out. Same with this. This is another Savage Gear trout. Kind of looks like the Huddleston, got the jig hook on there, but it has the boot tail, so you guys can see that's what it does in the water. These are killer right in the heart of the pre-spawn when they're starting to move up. I'll throw them right on the edge of a drop-off where they're starting to move up onto the flat. I'll throw them over rock piles, kind of like a jig, but those get it done. So big swim baits, big fish. And I got a couple of glides in here as well. So this is the Jerkbait Sneaky Pete and the Molix 178 SS. So I like this one. We'll put the Molix down for a second, but the Jerkbait, ooh, nice hook. I'll throw that on just my medium heavy rod with 15-pound fluoro, and it's got a really tight action in the water. Kind of like just goes like that. And the way that you want to use that is right in the pre-spawn when they're moving up on the brush and stuff up shallow and over the rock piles. You can get this right up next to those trees. Don't be afraid of getting snagged. Like, it has a tight enough wobble to where you can work it through those branches a little bit. And if you get really good at it, like, you can toss it right into that, not like right in the heart of the tree, obviously, like it has 2 treble hooks, but you can get in there and pull out some really big fish in the pre-spawn. And I really like this color as well. I want to say this is the Hitch color, but I'm not 100%. I caught some good fish on this last year. Just fishing it just like I told you guys, just right up in the cover. Don't be afraid to get snagged. Just go right after it in those brush piles and stuff, and you'll be surprised at what you pull out. But this is a trout style glide bait by Molix. It's a little bit shiny and it has a wider wobble as well. So with the wider wobble, I'll throw this from ice out until the end of pre-spawn. But this has, like, I've never seen a bait where it's 17 bucks. Like, it's kind of like the S-Waver, but it has those swivels right here, so the hook can swing freely when it's like caught in a fish's mouth. Like, that makes all the difference. You guys wouldn't believe how many fish you lose when it doesn't have the swivels like that, because a big fish will come up, they'll thrash their head and they'll spit it, but with these swivels it just kind of spins the bait around instead of popping the hooks. And I like throwing this in an open section of water where I know there could be fish. I don't like fishing this in super deep water, but I'll throw it like 8 to 10 is usually the depth that I like, over rocks, and just really like one hard crank of the reel, and then like just keep doing that, and it works the bait side to side and can really draw out some big bites. And the trout style, like I said, stay natural when the water's cold. Those fish know what they're after, and this is a great imitator of the trout in my area. So I'll show you a couple of jerkbaits now. A couple of shallow diving jerkbaits by Rapala that I like to use. They both dive 4 to 6 feet. This one has 2 trebles, but one has a feather hook, and this one just has the 3 trebles like a normal jerkbait. Those are great baits for anytime you're fishing a shallow pond or a shallow flat where those fish are moved up. You think they could be staging, ready to move up. So around here, there's a few ponds that are like dirt shallow, like deepest water's 14 feet, and those will get it done. Like they'll get it done all year because you can throw them in the deeper water. But when it's just starting to warm up, the grass is just starting to come up, maybe you'll find some fish shallow, but usually they'll be kind of on the hump in the bowl where it starts to move up into the weeds, especially when the water's really cold. And you can use those baits to just get them right down in front of their face. And like I said, the twitch, pause, drag, pause, twitch, that really gets it done for me around here, especially when the water's really cold. So I pretty much already covered the crankbaits that I wanted to show you, but I'll show you this one. This is a Rapala jointed deep diving crank. This is like 12 to 15 feet, I think. It's a shad wrap. And this color, like, it has a loud rattle to it. I caught my PB on this last year. It was like a 6.2 pound smallie. And I'll throw this on my rivers when the water's pretty cold because it has a unique action compared to other crankbaits, and I think it gets more bites. But 12 to 15 feet, throw it right in the current. If you know the fish are in the current, it's a great bait to throw. If you want to fish the edge of the current, make sure you're in that deeper water, getting down to the rocks still. But when the water is dingy, chartreuse and orange, great combo. I guess we'll talk about some jigs that I have rigged up next. And these are both 6 cents. I'll put this tackle box. I'll show you guys the ball head on this. 6 cents finesse jigs. And I'm throwing those with a curly tail grub, double curly tail grub. This is a 5/16 7-ounce and a 7/16 7-ounce. And I'm going to have to trim the skirts on these, trim them up. But that brown color can really get it done when the water's clear or the fish are finicky. But finesse jigs, I like to use those in a little bit different scenario than the football head. I like the football head anytime I'm going over. I'm at a bigger fish spot, like mainly largemouth fishing in the early season, like right after ice out. But the finesse jigs, if you're going for smallies, have one of these on. Like these just get bit like insane. And you want the double curly tail grub, or like this is a Zoom speed craw, just kind of like a no action trailer pretty much. But those really get it done in the springtime. And while I'm here, I'll talk about a couple of my pre-spawn baits. So these do have a kicking trailer on them with a lot of action. This is the Rage Chunk trailer. This is a homemade jig that I got at a local tackle shop. Kind of just a natural green pumpkin. Got some brown and black in there. Great clear watercolor. And then of course I have a black and blue tied on with a Guggen Baits rattling chunk trailer on there. But these great largemouth baits in the pre-spawn, smallmouth baits in the pre-spawn. But I mainly find that when the largemouth are moving up, they're feeding hard and they're sitting on those rock piles starting to warm up. The football head jig with a vibrant trailer coming across their face can really get it done in the springtime. So one bait that I haven't talked about as much is the Megabass Dark Sleeper, and how I use that and what I throw it on for a rod and stuff. So I'll take one out of the package right here. This is a smaller size. It's a 1/2 ounce, 3-inch little swim bait, and you can see it's got the weedless, like it's got the hook guard, the fins up here, kind of like a goby style swim bait. And this is the 3/4 ounce, 3.5 inch. But I'll use these just like a jig, and I'll throw them on my medium heavy rod still. Like, they're not swim baits per se. Like, I like throwing them more like a jig. Same thing, just like really slow on the bottom, kind of dragging it. And this color, especially I just tore the packaging, so I'm not even gonna be able to read it now. But this color, it's got some gold in it and stuff, a little bit of gold and purple. If you're fishing a bluegill lake, or we don't have bluegill up here, but like a pumpkin seed, sunfish style like thing, pumpkin seed, red-breasted, whatever sunfish you have in your lake. If you have a weed line, throwing this right over the weed line, getting that little tail to kick, throwing this on rock piles, just dragging it, hopping it like a jig. These can get bit more than a jig. Like, I know that sounds kind of weird because it's a pretty unique style bait, but those really can get bit more than a jig. And I saw it firsthand last year. I caught a ton of fish on them. So that's pretty much what I'm throwing in the early spring until pre-spawn. Like, ice out to pre-spawn, like I said. There's a couple of other baits that I throw, but those are the main ones. So I just wanted to take you through a look at my tackle box. And like I said, I got the S-Waver, jig, jerkbait, mini paddle tail, and big swim bait. Those are my 5 combos that I always have with me in my kayak, always have with me on the boat. You always want to be prepared, especially when the water's cold. You never know how like finesse you're gonna have to go and stuff, but those are the main baits that I throw. So if I had to give you 5, I would say jig, whether it's finesse head or football head, jerkbait, lipless, mini swim bait, like a 2.8 inch to 3 inch. I like that more than a Ned rig. And for me, it's a glide bait. Glide bait's number 5. I always can get follows on a glide bait. Like with a bait like this, sometimes you just want to see how many fish are down there. So you're twitching that over the top, you get a few follows, you follow up with that little paddle tail, and you'll get bit. So those baits are great from 35-degree water up to like 55, 60-degree water when they're getting ready to spawn. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little walkthrough what I'm throwing this spring. Love to see how you guys are catching fish this spring as well. So either leave a comment, shoot me a DM on Instagram at mainly_fishing. And let's get after him this spring, guys. Thanks for watching.